Speaker.
I call John O'Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with great pleasure that I rise to take a call on this bill. It's interesting, actually, I was just talking to one of the members opposite on the lift on the way here, and I thought I'm bound to get the name of it wrong for this Judicature Modernisation bill. We had a little debate in the lift chamber as to how to pronounce it, and thankfully the member was able to set me straight as I got my tongue twisted around it. But look, it is certainly a substantive bill. There's a lot of reading in this thing, 1,226 pages. It's a little slow to start off with, but I found that by about page 473, it really had you hooked. Well, I guess perhaps I was fibbing just a little bit. It's certainly very weighty, and as the chair of the Select Committee has said, it takes a little bit to be able to get through. And while I haven't read all of it, I've certainly taken very close attention to some aspects of it. I think it's very aptly named as the Judicature Modernisation Bill, because if we've got a bill that has been around since 1908, despite the fact that it's had a few amendments along the way, it seems most appropriate that we have something like this to modernise it. I guess the bill that we've had has stood the test of time for some 107 years, but now it's time to just, I guess, zhuzh things up a little bit and for us to move on and have a look at what's happening. It's been great, I guess, for me to see this government's reforms in the justice area. We have been working very hard at putting victims first in the legislation that we have been drafting, and I think this is incredibly appropriate. While it's not necessarily directly related in this, but I know certainly whenever we have things that make things better for victims, to me that's incredibly important. I know some 6 or 7 years ago our family was involved where my brother-in-law was killed in a motorcycle accident, and the driver there was up on charges. It meant that we had to, from time to time, travel to the court hearings. And I know that my wife a number of times went to go and support her sister, having to travel up to Taupo and Rotorua from Palmerston North, only to find when they got there that the lawyer wasn't going to be available and that the case wasn't going to be proceeding that day. And I couldn't help but think, actually, at that time, we really need to ensure that our justice system becomes more victim-focused and takes into account the needs of those people. And that's exactly what this government is working on doing with the justice legislation that we have been working on for the past 6 or so years. And so I guess really what we're looking for and what this bill is aiming to do is ensure that our justice system, whether it be in the criminal field or the civil field, is more flexible, more responsive and more transparent, because not just victims will benefit from that, our society will most certainly benefit when our justice system is more flexible, is more responsible and more transparent. And that's exactly what these 1,226 pages are aiming to do, to actually modernise our justice system and bring it into the 21st century and ensure that those principles are adhered to. Mr. Speaker, I want to focus initially on the technological advances that are being taken throughout this bill, and I think it's really great to see things moving along and getting into something that is more appropriate to this day and age. We do live in a world of Facebook and Twitter and people living online, so I think the provision that says that there is a presumption that all written judgments will be published online unless there is a good reason not to is a very good provision for us to have in a bill. Of course, there need to be limits on this. I think perhaps it might be inappropriate if every judge had a Twitter account and just before or just after making a judgment they fired it up on Twitter and said, just lock that guy up for 5 years, that was awesome. I don't know that that would necessarily be quite appropriate in terms of the technological advances. I guess we don't necessarily want judges sitting in their chair with selfie sticks and posting that up on Facebook either, so I think there's clearly some boundaries that we want to have in terms of the technology and how that's moving forward. But there are some very good provisions, and as I said, publishing written judgments online, unless there is a good reason not to, is a very good place to start. I think the other technological advance which I really do support is the idea of there being audio-visual links, in particular for certain hearings and that type of a certain type. And the member opposite said that we shouldn't necessarily be having that for the full hearing part of it. But I think when we are talking about remand court appearances, this is going to make a significant saving for time, for efforts, and also in monetary terms. Someone said to me, and I have not verified this amount, but it does not surprise me if this was the case, that every time we transfer a prisoner from remand to court and back to prison again, costs the taxpayer about $5,000. And I guess that seems really ridiculous, but if you think of the fact that you've got to take 2 prison guards and a vehicle and their time associated with that, that you then perhaps have to have somebody providing cover to fulfil the duties that they otherwise would have been doing, even if it's only half that amount, that's significant. Because what we know is that there are approximately 40,000 remand court appearances made each year. 40,000. So even if that was in fact only, if that was $5,000, that's a $200 million saving for the taxpayers right there. If we can have those 200 million, Mr. Hudson, listen up, and I will help you out. Listen the first time and we'll get it right. But no, there are significant savings to be made. If we're going to have 40,000, well, it's hard because he can't read my lips. He's behind me, you see, so he can't read my lips. I may have eyes in the back of my head, I just don't have lips in the back of my head for him to read. Anyway, we have got, as I say, 40,000 remand court appearances being made, and if we can start to introduce those audio-visual links, and for more and more of those, there are significant savings to be made. There is a significant benefits to our whole system when we do that. Mr. Speaker, there are so many things that I could go on for hours if I was to go through this page by page, and while I know the members opposite would just love me to climb into it, take you through page by page, clause by clause, I don't want to do that to you because it just wouldn't be fair. But I do, Mr. Speaker, want to touch a little bit on part 4 of the bill, which provides for interest to be paid as compensation for delay where there is for payments of debts. And Mr. Speaker, I think we would all agree there is nothing more frustrating than when somebody owes you money and has not paid you that money, that in fact actually to be able to start incurring interest on that is fair and reasonable. At the moment, thankfully, we're in a low inflation environment, and that's exceptionally good. But if things were to change at some point in the future and inflation was running through the roof, then of course people's amount of money that they might be owed in terms of a monetary claim would be diminishing at a great rate of knots. So I think it's incredibly important to protect, again, victims or people who are owed money through the court system, whether it be through reparation or otherwise, through damages and other monies, to be able to reclaim that cost of interest. And so it's a really, I think, a fair and reasonable thing to expect. And as I said, there is nothing worse than when you're owed money by somebody and they haven't got round to paying it for whatever reason, that you are being worse off because there's no interest accruing against it. Mr. Speaker, I just want to conclude with talking about the provision to include all district courts into one. And I think really at the end of the day there's no need for us going forward to have completely separate entities as district courts right around New Zealand. It might have made sense, I guess, back in 1908 when the transfer documents between one and the other, it would have taken however long by horseback or whatever was the mode for delivering of information back in 1908. There certainly wasn't the ability for audio-visual links, that's for sure. But I think it's incredibly important that we actually get some joined-up thinking right across the country. We take advantage of the ability of those district courts to be able to work closer together. Of course, we will have branches in different places because obviously work will need to be done. We're not just going to have one centralised court, but I think it's incredibly important that as we bring these things together, Mr. Speaker, we will be able to work in a far more efficient and effective manner. So, Mr. Speaker, it's been a great deal of work for the Justice and Electoral Select Committee to work their way through. It's been a lot of work for those people who have worked on drafting this legislation. But Mr Speaker, it seems that there's agreement on both sides of the House that there was certainly timely for us to do this, and with that, Mr Speaker, I would like to endorse this bill to the House. Thank you.